Hi, my name is Ellen Diederich, and I'm going to do a quick show of the kind of supplies you need to take one of my workshops and help you understand if you're purchasing to take an online course or video. Basically, to paint in watercolor, you need watercolors, paints, a palette, watercolor paper, and brushes. So I basically in my class have you require maybe 3 brushes, and you can have others, but I'll show you the difference. This is my favorite brush. It's called a 1-inch wash brush, and it's a Winsor Newton Scepter brush. It is part sable and part synthetic, which is this whole brand that I like. That's because the sable holds a lot of fluid and the scepter gives it spring. You can buy sable brushes for over $200. I haven't bought one for so long. I think they're probably $300, but I don't know. But I know that this is a reasonably priced brush and lasts and works very well. Now they come in a 3/4 size and different sizes. This is a 1/2 inch. So I use these all the time. This is a script brush. It's a number 3 script, and it is called a round. And this is a number 10 round. And I always call this a long liner, but it really is a 1-inch scepter brush. If you can get this, the number 1 here, size round. But you see, this has a very long bristle on these, and I wanted to compare a problem a lot of students have. They all buy an acrylic brush, so if you go in, it'll look like it has watercolor bristles, and they'll say it's for watercolor or acrylic, but it has a longer bristle. See how proportionately longer this is to the size than that one. They're more dramatic on the wider size. That makes your brush floppy. So I would get this more square shaped brush. I've had this one. This is 1.5 inches. I use it all the time. I could just put water on my whole sheet of paper very quickly with it, or cover big areas. Very useful. This is a Goliath. It's a Winsor Newton Scepter Goliath, and it's a number 20. And you can cover big areas with this brush. I just prefer the flats, as they're generally called. This is a house brush on my list, and you can buy these at the hardware store, and they get all messy like this after I use them, and I keep using them for years. I had one that got holes in it, and I finally threw it out because it held water in the holes. This is a palette knife I find very useful. And this is an interesting item. You need a scissor at a class. And I have this one from sewing class in high school because I put my name on it and nobody wants it. So it says Ellen Westling. So I still have this, so it's a good idea to do that. So those are the brushes, and I really like these brushes. You can use other brushes. If you take a class from me, you can use the brushes you have and maybe try one of these and see. Most everybody who takes a class ends up with one of these. So I'm kind of addicted to that. There's other great brushes to use. Another very useful tool is masking tape. I use the 3/4 and the 1 inch. You can cut stencils out of it. Don't stock up on masking tape because it's on sale, because it gets old and it doesn't work very well. So just only go buy 1 or 2 tubes. Now I found this tape. It's very expensive. It's frog tape, and this is a 1 inch, and then it has smaller. It's yellow tape, but when it pulls up, it doesn't rip your surface as well. You have to be more careful pulling the regular masking tape off. So I recommend this. This sticks better for like over your staples, so anything large like that I would use the cheaper tape. but the frog tape is fabulous. So in the workshop, you need a board. It could be a piece of thick cardboard, a plywood. This is called Gator Board. It's lightweight and hard, and it won't soak up watercolor paper. It comes in 2 widths. You can get it like 3/4 inch, and that is thick enough you can staple in it. And the thinner Gator Board, you can clamp a sheet on with a clamp like that and keep it in place. If you're stretching paper, you can put staples on it, and I have a video on stretching paper, and you can staple it right onto, you get the paper wet, staple it, and then when I put the masking tape over the staples, because I always paint right through the staples and then I'll put something important there and then it gets cut off in the frame. And so you don't have to have the tape, but it works well, especially if you're painting on a piece for a long time. A lot of times we want to cheap out on the paper when we're new, and the paper is very critical. I recommend the Arches watercolor paper. This is like when you go and buy some of these little watercolor sets in there, they are great for kids. I had a student in a class who used one of these, and I showed how to lift something, and it ripped her paper right off when I did it. This is not going to hold up, but it's not bad. Maybe it's better for sketches. Great for kids, but not going to take a lot of work. This Arches is tougher than nails, and it has sizing in it. Now, this piece was taken off a block. You see the black edge? And they have called a watercolor block where you can buy those, and they're expensive. They're less than buying a bunch of sheets maybe, but a block has an edge on it. So when you're working along, your hand falls off the edge. I don't like that. And then if you decide you want to stop and work on something else, you have to take the painting off anyhow, and then you don't have it in the block anymore if you go back to work on it. So there's no reason to pay for the watercolor block. The best thing you can do is buy a full sheet. Now, in my classes, I always offer paper at a very reasonable price. I buy it in bulk, and maybe you have a friend you can buy in bulk together if you're painting a lot. But this is the Arches, and I've used it, and it takes, this is a 140-pound cold press. It's thick. It comes hot press, which is very smooth, and then they have rough that has a lot of texture, and this is somewhere in between. I use this mostly. I can get a rough texture with this, and I don't have the trouble with the back running that I get with hot press paper. So I really like this stuff. Now you can cut this paper in half. It has a front side and a back side. You can paint on either side. There's not a lot of change in the texture, but it is different. And then you can paint on a practice on one side and your main painting on the front. And you can cut this down to any size and put it on your board. If you're doing a half sheet painting, like a smaller painting with a board, you can hold it in place with clamps. So I'd get the, my board is, my paper, my full sheet paper is 22 by 30. My boards are just like an inch bigger, so I can fit a clamp around it. And I can just clamp this on. This works much better if you're clamping on the thin Gator board, because it fits easily and it's very hard to get the big clamp on the big board. But you can see you can turn this and you can have it go all the way across the board and work on it. Then some of the drawing utensils are erasers. Now I notice at Office Max they sell a kit, and maybe they sell it more than one place, that comes with a white, a small kneadable eraser, and a small gum eraser. I use all of these tools. This is my kneadable eraser. And I used to use this all the time for drawing, but this is a fabulous tool. Like if you draw boldly, which will help you paint, then if it's too dark before you start, you can knead this to a cleaner spot, make it into a tube. I kind of leave mine in a tube and just squish it a little bit, and then you can roll it over your pencil lines and it will lighten them so you don't smear them like if you're using. And this works really well. I just picked this tip up from someone and it's helped me so many times. I've had a pencil line that was too dark and I drew it boldly. It's an important shape, and then I'm sitting there trying to get it out from under the paint, and the paint kind of sets the pencil line. You never ever want to use one of those red pencils on your watercolor paper because it will stain and smear everything. But this is a number 2 pencil. This is a pencil I use to draw. This is the perfect pencil for drawing with watercolor. So you need a gum eraser. I use this for lifting tricks. And this is what I use for scrubbing pencil lines off. This I can scrub and it takes pencil off really well. It's nice and firm. So I like those 3. These are the clamps. They have different clamps too. Then I have on my list watercolor pencils. You do not need to buy watercolor pencils. I love drawing with watercolor pencils because you can scrub out an area with your brush while you're in it and get rid of a pencil line. And I usually buy this 36 set of Derwents, and they have all these beautiful pencils. And some places you can go in and pick them, but I haven't seen it lately where you could pick out the colors you wanted and add to them. But I would not buy the small set because it basically has a bunch of dark black and gray and brown. And my mother told me, you should draw with a gray paintbrush, Mom. That was because of those pencil lines, Ellen. She said, draw with a gray brush. And I thought, when I saw the gray watercolor pencil, I thought, oh, there it is. I can do that. But for some reason, the gray really stains and it's very difficult to remove. So I don't use the dark color. So that's why you want to get these lighter ones with all these colors in them. They're fun, they're inspiring. So I use these. You can see they get pretty small. I keep using them for years and years. They will stay on your paper permanently if you like. You can take them off with water. You can also color in an area and blend it with water. There's lots of ways to use these and paints. Like maybe you're drawing on life and then you just add a little water to blend it. It's just something. I use it for fun. I make marks on my pieces with them. We're going to talk about the paints. This is a brand of paints I get. It's the Winsor Newton, and they come in 2 sizes. This is a 14 milliliter size, and this is a 5 milliliter size. Now, just a little tip. One of the things I hate the most is squishing the last blob of paint out of a tube. So if you get a bigger tube, you don't have to do that as often. It is also cheaper per ounce than the smaller tubes. But the smaller tubes, if you're trying a new color, is a good way, or if you're a new painter and you want to make sure you like this, it's a good way to get a lot of colors to try. These, I have specifically chosen my pigments. I've tested, I looked for high permanency, and they're double A's or A's in my color category. Now there's many brands of good watercolor paint. They also have student grade paints and professional grade paints. Student grade paints are usually in a longer shaped tube. In these great brands, I'd recommend any of these. Daniel Smith, Holbein, M. Graham, Grumbacher, QOR from Golden, or Utrecht. They all have terrific paints, and you may like one of those better. I often find there's an odd color that I really like and try, and I will have something from a different brand that I use frequently. Now, if you're thinking you want to help a kid paint, don't go buy these paints for them because they're full of toxic chemicals and poisonous. Buy them a Crayola set or a Prang set. This set, you see, has a, I think Crayola finally learned you have to put a piece of white paper under it so you can see the colors. They used to have a yellow color thing, and then when you mix, you can't tell what you're mixing. So if you have your students put a piece of paper under, they can see the colors. And then I definitely get them a different brush. They have the most horrible brushes in these sets, but it's something to use, and these, you can use these in a class. All right, we're going to talk about palettes. A lot of people don't, they're buying all this paint and they want to have it in the tube, and then they just want a little plate to mix their paint on. Well, you can make your painting session much more successful if you have a good palette, and this will keep your paints in good condition and you can travel around with them. So I highly recommend the Robert E. Wood palette. It's probably not good for painting on location because it's so big, but it is a wonderful studio palette. It has these 4 containers on the top for mixing paint, and then it has these compartments in it. Now if you see, if you had a big brush, okay, these big compartments are very important when you're selecting a palette. I bought one in college that had little bitty squares, and I see them every so often, and you can't put a big, see, you can put a big brush in here and get paint out. That's the activity you're going to do. And if you have a brush that's bigger, it gets split into, if you have a small palette, and your brush will start to get permanent split marks in it, and then when you paint, you'll make a space and it ruins your brushes. So I like to get a big square one. So you can have, there are different palettes, but I would definitely get one with a cover and big squares. Now I made this sheet up with my palette. You see I have an empty spot, a couple empty spots. That's where I try stuff out, and you can write on the side of them if you're trying to learn the names. Now what I do is I set this up so that I can put the colors in the, and I set them right in here. This way, if I want to rearrange them, I can do so. Now that might be this square. So here is my French ultramarine. So I do this with your tubes. I set them in there so you got them where you want them before I put any paint in the palette. So here is my Quin Magenta, Windsor Yellow Deep. Now this says Windsor Yellow Deep, and on my palette sheet I just found out they got new gamboge back, and I bought one small tube to check, and it is really my favorite yellow new gamboge. So I would get that now. I'm so excited, I could hardly believe it. This is a cadmium free orange. You can still buy cadmium orange, cadmium colors. They're not safe, and in California you can't buy them. That is because they have they can cause cancer. So if you want to protect yourself, use cadmium free. It's usually similar in price, maybe a little more. So I put all these favorite colors in here, and I talk about them while I'm painting in my class, so you'll learn more about them. But you can see by doing this, you can move stuff around in case you have something else you want to add in there. And if you have old paints, you can put them in there too. So, but you just go ahead and, if you notice, it's kind of like a color wheel, but there's one big difference I make, and that is that I put my green over here, because in the color wheel, green is between blue and yellow. But what happens if I have my greens there, it always gets in my yellows and makes them dirty. So I put the green over here on this side by the reds. So then Indian red. Here's a cobalt green. Some colors are more expensive and they're on my less needed list, but they have wonderful uses. I don't have white, and I've recently decided I'm not that totally against white. I think I teach transparent watercolor, so I want you to learn how to mix the colors without that. Now, if you look, I have a lot of primary colors. I have more yellows. I didn't get them out, but you can put them. I have a lot of primaries, so I can mix like a warm yellow and a cool yellow. I have a cadmium lemon. I should have that there. But like this is a warm red and a cool red. So I have warm and cool of each color to help me. And green is not a primary, but I have a few greens. I think that makes it easier. Now, here is my palette that I've used. I'm going to show you how you clean it and how you set it up, or how you put the paint in, and some tricks. So you can see I have a nice dirty palette here for you, and it gets used for years. This is a newer one because I took my old one somewhere, but I take a wet paper towel and I can do this and just scrub it out. I go up on the sides, and if I'm going to go teach, usually I spray this out so it looks pretty good. But it looks, the big thing is you have this mixing area nice and clean. If you want bright colors, you need to have it that way when you start. Now, the only other thing I'm going to show you here is putting the paint into the color. Now, you can see these are still kind of soft, and I try to make a line of paint. What happens when people are new and they just paid that big bill for all that paint, they don't want to put very much out, and that's one of the most wasteful ways to use your paint, because if it dries in a little chip, when you scrub in there with a brush, it falls right out, and you will lose all of that paint. But when I come back to my palette, I don't put all the paint out. That's why these big tubes are so helpful. But I put a flat color, and I don't need very much, but I just go over the top in a line. And what that does, it softens the paint below and it keeps it fresh. I don't put water in here because it makes the paint disappear. I'll add some permanent rose. Now you see I'm squishing this tube from the bottom. What happens a lot, if you see this tube, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, there's an air pocket there between the paint and the opening of the thing. And if you don't paint for a while, that air gets in there and dries the paint in your tube, and it's hard to get it out. So to avoid that, you take it and you squish from the bottom, go straight across with your paint, and then I take it from the bottom, and I try not to overdo it because I try to fill up that air pocket. And then I put my cap back on. And then you can, if you're down there, you can roll this up to keep that air pocket from coming. And your paint will last longer if you do that. So the big thing is no little chips of paint. Like this one is kind of got a lot of space around, but I can still get my brush in there and grab it. But if I wanted to refresh this, I can just put a little paint on top, and I might try to stretch that out. But that makes this all easier to work from. See here, this one I've been using for a while, and I've noticed that some tubes have worse covers to work with, so this is a pretty good cover on the Winsor Newton. But you don't want to go put water in your paint. When I was in grade school, they taught us to do this. And maybe you do it with this kind of a palette, but you put water on top of the paint. But you don't want to do that with these expensive colors because it separates what's called the gum arabic, which is a binder that holds the pigment and the paint together. And so you don't want to leave water standing in your palette ever. And to get rid of water standing in my palette, at the end of the day, I take this, a corner of a paper towel, and I soak up the water. And then I'm just adding fresh paint. But I don't leave that water in there, or you get that crumbly paint, because that's the binder, and it separates it out if you leave a bunch of water. And you'll get water in there when you're working, and it might seem like you're throwing away some paint, but it's worth it. So that's how you set up your palette. No little globs. Look at this little glob here. That could get loose. Well, that's a pretty good sized little glob. Maybe you can't get it loose, so that's good. But try to go straight across with your paint. Add it every time. Okay. Here's some final tips for using your paint. If you're at the end of a tube, that's where I said is my least favorite part. When I get just about this much paint in it, you see I left this tube here. I didn't finish it off, and it got dried in there with an air box. So I can't get this paint out. Okay, here are some extra tips for getting paint out of the tube. Like here is one that I told you that there was the air pocket and the paint got stuck in there. This paint is still good. It depends on how bad you need it and if you don't have an extra tube. But you could take a razor blade and cut this tube open. And I should have something underneath it so I don't cut my nice table. I'm just going to cut through one side, supposedly. I've done this a few times. But usually when I'm really desperate for a color, because I kind of don't enjoy doing this. It doesn't happen too often anymore now that I know the secret. You can peel this off. And you have look at all that paint that was left in there. That's a lot of paint. And you can basically pry it out with a palette knife or something. Stick that right in there. Well, you could get that too. I'm not going to do that for this video. But then you could put your burnt sienna. Just take from your new tube, make a little glue for it, and stick it in there. And you can have it on top, but you can work with that paint then. See, so you didn't waste all that paint. That's a lot to waste. You could do a couple paintings with it. All about burnt sienna. So remember that tip. Squish it to the top and tighten it. If your tubes get too tight, you can use the needle nose pliers and open them. So it's pretty good. Now, if you're at the end of a tube like this one and you want to get the paint out, and I said I don't enjoy this, I don't want to wait till, I don't want to leave this like this and try to hope that it won't dry out by the next time. So I'm going to get this out of here. So I'm going to squish as much of this out. This is very expensive paint. This is my cobalt violet. And you can squish as much as you can. Sometimes it gets in the top of the cap. And you could take a brush, like this is a acrylic with a hair on it. And you can kind of just plunge that in there and get the rest of the paint out. As you say, it's perfectly good paint. Hate to waste it. And if I'm going, I do this when I'm going to paint. Because when I'm got most of it out of there, then I'll put it here and I'll take some water and get it out of my brush. So I'm ready to use it instead of just wasting it. Now, I didn't show you my bucket. I have a great big bucket. I like this. A lot of people have 2-bucket systems. Do whatever you like. I like this because it keeps my brushes clean and I have lots of fresh water. And to store my brushes, the guideline is that you put brushes flat. This is particularly true with rounds. The round with a sharp tip is very valuable when you need a sharp detail. And what happens when you stand a brush up, the tip eventually falls. And so you're supposed to put these flat and they have brush holder things that you can slip all your brushes in. I'm paint so much, I don't want to take things out of a brush holder. And I work with mostly flats. Also, if I put them in a drawer, something hits the brush and it gets deformed from the getting stuck on something. So I just set them in here with my toothbrushes and all the weird things I have, some oil brushes, and I just set them in here and they're ready to use. You can see this Goliath probably used to have a sharp tip on it, but it's pretty dull. So and that's been in this jar for years. I think I've had it for 20 years, so it's sinking. But that is a way to protect your brushes. I think this is superior. I often throw a razor blade down at the bottom and have to take them all out to get it, but I often need a razor blade when I'm painting too. So I'll have my palette knife. I do some scraping and different things. So any brushes that you have, just a jar like this works very well. All right. Thank you. I hope that was helpful.